The euro has strengthened against the dollar on the back of reports that the ECB is considering tapering its QE programme. However, the ECB told CNBC its governing council has not discussed the topic stated in a report, which suggested the central bank could wind back its asset purchase programme by around 10 billion euros a month. Let's get back to Vasilios Giannakis as well. David writes in and says for his tuppence worth, it was that ECB taper talk that moved the markets aggressively yesterday. How realistic, how obvious is it? Or does it show that actually it's the beginning of the end for this ultra easy time?
Well, I think it's a bit premature to start talking about tapering of the ECB's program. I think the market reacted to it, but I don't think that it's likely to be a big driver going forward. And if I want to tie this back to your previous comment about why one would be buying euro and sterling,
yes,
sterling and all that, I think, first of all, let me just say that obviously during the years of the Eurozone debt crisis, we had a lot of flows coming from the Eurozone to the UK. And to the extent that uncertainty in the UK increases, this is seeing a reversal of these flows, and that's putting upside pressure on euro sterling. But the other thing is that fundamental to all these comments about the ongoing issues about the Eurozone and the link to the exchange rate is that the market is at equilibrium at every point in time. And I think my main point has been over the past 1.5 years that the euro in general had undershoot fundamentals, even if you take into account the massive increase in the ECB's balance sheet. So now the market has come to realize that and is now reversing that process. Bottom line, a lot of doom and gloom was already in the price.
Just one comment for me. You said during the Eurozone debt crisis. I know it's really unfashionable of me to say this, and everybody just can negate this as much as they like. I still think we're in a Eurozone debt crisis. I don't see any difference in terms of the key metrics from the height of the crisis that I mentioned in 2010, 2011. I'm sorry to say, I know that we've got this fantastic white knight performance from the ECB, and I think they're performing heroically to negate it, but we have no growth or very low growth. We have high unemployment or very high unemployment. We have high debt or very high debt. I don't see what's changed in the Eurozone debt crisis.
Right, okay, so let's take one thing at a time, because you threw out a lot of aspects there. No, it's fine.
I think the debts are as drastically worrying as ever.
Right, okay, so first of all, one of the main issues of the turmoil back in 2011, 2012 was Greece. Greece is no longer an issue for global markets. As far as Greece itself is concerned, it remains a problem, but it's no longer a systemic problem, largely because 85% of its debt is not in the hands of the market. Now, as far as the debt metrics you mentioned, yes, they are high, but the issue is whether countries can actually are able to service that debt. And if you compare the massive explosion in yields that we saw in Spain and Italy back in 2011, 2012, right now we're much more normalized levels. Going back to the macro fundamentals, it is a slow growth environment in the Eurozone, but nonetheless, the fact of the matter is that Eurozone is a much better place compared to what it was 3-4 years ago.
Vasilios, I disagree. I'm sorry. Look, I'm a massive patriot of Europe. I love the EU in many ways. Obviously, there's some very tough stuff, and it's hard to love some of the institutions sometimes, but I'm a big fan of it, and I want to see it work. I'm sorry, let's take Italy. Italy, which is now issuing 50-year paper at 2.85%. Unemployment is 12.5%. Growth is non-existent in many, many parts of the country if you split the north and the south as well. The debt levels are obscenely large as well. You've got a political crisis. You've got a banking crisis, which, let's face it, despite the papering over the cracks, goes really near to the very top of the banking sector. How can we say Italy is any better now than it was in 2010?
Well, first of all, my comment was about the Eurozone in general.
But Italy's the largest debt market in Europe. It's got 2 trillion euros worth of debt.
Well,
Vasilios.
Spain has moved ahead a lot with structural reforms. Unemployment has come down in the Eurozone. It is coming down at a slow pace, but we knew that all along, largely because there are a lot of rigidities in the labour market. And you mentioned the political crisis in Italy. I take all that point, but imagine that if this reform that Renzi is trying to push, if it goes through, this is actually going to alleviate a lot of pressures in the system in order for Italy to go ahead with structural reforms.